they do is they work to ensure the safety of people, animals, and the environment, but they don't actually ensure or promise you that those products that you're buying work. That's not their role. Safety is their role.
I'm just trying to understand the rationale for regulating something that doesn't have
Workers.
a harmful
I would say
impact.
human consumption would be the concern there.
This might be like hot to the taste. Is that
No, the idea just being that if you apply anything, that the public has the right to know what was applied to that food. And so that's my best understanding of it.
Oh, I see. So when you get the permit, then you have to label the product too.
I don't know,
I
that
can
we
be
label it.
I can be more specific about
Excellent.
that if you want.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We're talking the general use thing. Where you just,
right. Okay, so a
I'm
general.
just trying to understand why they're categorized the same as the dangerous ones.
They're not
Oh, they're
at
not.
all.
Oh, they're not.
So you need something called a general use permit if you are producing an agricultural good for sale that has had pesticides applied to it, whether or not they're acceptable by organic standards or they're a synthetic pesticide. And that is to protect human health.
and
But
to
does
give
that
it away as
include
well.
what you're giving away? Because that was,
It does.
Yep.
so.
And it also, okay, so then there's another level of license called the private applicator restricted use license. In order for you to use a restricted use pesticide, which would be a pesticide that's deemed by the EPA to be more toxic, you need to have this higher level of license where you've had to take an examination to show the New Hampshire Department of Agriculture that you've received a certain level of education and understanding about the use of restricted use or hotter pesticides. So, yeah.
So
And-
in the example of the food pantry, how would it feed back? So like if there was a problem with food at the food pantry, they would call the Department of Agriculture, the Department of Agriculture would know what kind of pesticides were put on the plants? Is that the...
It would be more like you get someone with a bellyache, they complain, hey, that zucchini squash that I ate, that I got from the food pantry, and this is a made-up example,
Sure.
made me sick, I don't know what was on it. And so the department of, what they say, where did you get it, which vendor sold it, and then if you grew that zucchini, someone says to you, what did you apply to that zucchini, what best management practices did you use to produce that zucchini? And you would say, oh my goodness, all I used was a little bit of neem oil to keep the bugs off, and I have this practice where my workers, my employees are always instructed to wash their hands thoroughly before harvest, and then we wash all of the containers before we put the zucchini into the containers in the farm stand, etc. It's a lot has to do with liability and protection, both for the consumer and for the farmer and for the agricultural employees.
But does that include
Donation.
Yeah, donation, just, I have a garden in my backyard, I plant the extra, we're all hearing now, plant the extra row, and I think it's a good thing. Are we all at
Do you apply
At
anything
risk.
to it?
It's a gray area, and it's subject to the
I don't
interpretation of the
believe in
Division of
applying
Pesticide
anything
Control
to drive
Directorate.
it lousy
What
yields,
if
but
every
So
garden-
you wouldn't have to do it, but if you apply anything to it, we understand it, and maybe we'll have to get greater clarity, but as I understand, as I've been told, if I apply anything to my backyard garden to donate it, I should have a general use permit.
okay.
With that said, the police are not out enforcing it.
And we're
It
not
might be a gray area.
regulators.
We're not regulators, but so that's the idea.
And that, by the way, is just a list of what you used that you file annually. It's not a license. It's not a examination type license.
I'm just thinking of contaminated soil. I mean, how many people actually have their soil? It's likely that lead in the soil is going to have a greater impact than a garlic spray, and how many people have their, who are donating
Okay.
are
Well, I agree with you. Let me tell you something. The common gardener uses a whole lot more on his or her garden than garlic spray. And I know that because I take the phone calls. I have bugs. I just put down some malathion what are they and how do I get rid of them? What are the bugs?
No, I
have
think the
no
problem
idea.
is with the idea of garlic spray and hot pepper
That's
spray as
just
being something
The
that.
example is maybe a little bit too extreme.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, the idea is, in theory, if you're gonna grow anything and apply anything at all to it, you, in theory, you, as we understand the regulations, should have a general use permit. But I wouldn't trip up on this. I wouldn't,
No.
you know, not donate anything. I wouldn't get out of the gardening business.
Don't trip
you
up
know.
on it.
If you wanted to do the letter of the law and have your I's dotted and your T's crossed, you'd send 20 bucks in, fill out a very simple application and be all said and done. And that's a whole different ballgame than if you're gonna apply these hotter materials, these restricted use pesticides, where you need to understand workers' protection, how to protect people on your
Right.
farm or
You
in
can't
your
even
home.
buy them without having the permit.
Right, and so just so we don't really trip out on that one, just poor example, I guess, but it's the case. And like Amy says, a lot of people apply a lot of things. So in one sense, I'm kind of happy that exists, because they throw everything in the kitchen sink at it, and then they call you after the fact. And people don't really study the label really well. And so I'd at least like to know if that was on my food, or at least like people to be aware that if I'm giving this away, I should be applying it. But this is, so that's not necessarily the focus of the talk, so back to kind of protecting ground and surface water. Remember the landscape. Dick spoke about livestock in water bodies. In theory, they should be fenced out. They can be flash grazed or moved through to eat vegetation on the shore, on the slopes, but they shouldn't be in the water bodies, dunging and urinating. And that's again to keep the water bodies clean. Oftentimes in the spring and in the winter, when the animals are not out on the fields, we really like to not have water running off of roofs and buildings and taking the manure with it, or in the soluble
Right, so if
nutrients
the
of
water
buildings.
is dripping off this huge surface area of a roof and landing down here where cattle are basically fenced in for part of their day, then that wouldn't be a good situation.
And so there's two programs specifically, if you're thinking of being a backyard farmer and having livestock, the NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and the handout will actually help you fund what they call heavy use areas, places to keep cattle that won't get all pugged up, and usually it's a concrete floor or landscape fabric underneath it to help maintain and control runoff and the manure and urine, and then also pay for gutters off of buildings so that you can actually capture your water. So neat programs for that.
So Dick has mentioned a lot of this, but basically nitrogen corn, sweet corn or cow corn or field corn is a heavy user of nitrogen. So corn uses a lot of nitrogen. So therefore nitrogen is something that we have to reapply frequently to grow crops like corn. And so you consider that before you apply fertilizer.
And when considering how much nitrogen to apply, were there any crops that actually added nitrogen to the soil? And those are called leguminous crops. Nitrogen has a triple bond, very difficult to break in nature. Lightning can break it, and then bacteria can break it. And those plants that effectively have a house for the bacteria in exchange for the carbohydrates, the rhizobium bacteria, can break that triple bond of nitrogen, and so they add to the soil, and we want you to consider that, because again, you'd have to apply less material.
Right.
And so that's the whole idea.
What would be some examples of legume crops? Nitrogen fixing. Yep. Yep. Alfalfa, clover, right. Those are the legume crops. Great. Okay.
Okay.
So we've said that. Avoid application of manure on frozen ground.
Cover crops. You have a whole handout that NRCS put together on cover crops. The whole idea on cover crops is bare soil is public enemy number one. To a farm, a bare soil is public enemy number one for a variety of reasons. Certainly, they're not getting any production off of it. It's highly prone to erosion. And so, to a water body, bare soil has an ability to be removed